mean, Super, na živo sme. Okay. Hello and welcome to the Peace Talk, this time with independent researcher, activist, and author Yavor Tarinski. Tarinski was born in Bulgaria, resides now in Greece, and is active in social movements there. He participated in the editorial team of the political journal Babylonia and of Agora International. Furthermore, he is a member of the Transnational Institute of Social Ecology. He's the author of several books, and his main area of research is direct democracy, social struggles, social ecology, and anarchism. Dear Yavor, I thank you very much for following my invitation.
Thank you very much for having me. I would just want to make one clarification that I'm no longer affiliated with the Babylonia project. I'm now part and co-founder of a new libertarian journal here in Greece called Tavtolexi. And thank you very much for having me here.
Okay, sounds nice, yes. So before we dig deeper into your books, here on this side of the screen, there will be your books. So yeah, here now we can see the book of Bookchin and so on. So those of you who are live on the stream, they can see the books, the covers. So as I mentioned, you published several books. Before we dig deeper into your scientific work and before we dig deeper into the thinking of great thinkers like Castoriadis or Murray Bookchin, let me ask you a more personal question. What did motivate you to do research in these fields of social struggles, anarchism, and egalitarian alternatives, direct democracy, and so on and so forth? So what is your personal motivation? Why do you feel the need to, to change the world and maybe to make it a better place?
Thank you for the question. I got politically involved from a relatively young age as a teenager. And I was always interested in grassroots activism, in the what we call rank and file activism, and horizontal one for that. And with participation in collectives of this type, I developed a great interest into thinking of what actually we are developing as an alternative through our actions. And this led me, I was always very interested in history. I was very much interested in the history of the libertarian movement in Bulgaria and abroad. And this led me from reading history books about this as a supplementary to my activism into delving into political analysis about theory, about philosophy. And this led me slowly moving from the classics of Bakunin, of Kropotkin, of Malatesta, into more and more in-depth analysis that is also more recent to our time, like Bookchin, of Hannah Arendt, of Castoriadis, always in the direction of direct empowerment of the people, the self-empowerment of the people. This is what always motivated me. And have in mind that I became politically active in Bulgaria, a highly conservative place where there is a little grassroots activity. So I needed a lot for motivation to read about what is going on abroad, and also to read this theory to give me a sense of vision of how things could happen. And things with reading more and more books on this topic, I started envisioning and developing my own ideas of how things should develop. And until this very day, I continue in this direction. I see it anymore as a part of my political activism. It's one thing being active in grassroots collectives and doing the mundane everyday part of maintaining a social space, going to protests, etc., something that I still continue to do because I believe it's very important. But I also find it very important that we participate in parallel to this in the ongoing debate, social movements that are developing online, all these that refer to the common discourse, to degrowth, direct democracy, autonomy, social ecology. There is an international discussion going on between different movements that are located in different localities. And I think it's very important to participate in this, because to only react to what the system does not leave you nowhere. There was an Israeli thinker, an advocate for direct democracy, Akior, who have said that just reacting leaves you impotent, because the system sets the agenda and you only follow. To become politically potent, you have to start thinking of your own agenda.
Okay, sounds very nice. Very interesting. Let me move on. Could you please describe your experience? You mentioned now that you are active in social movements. Could you describe your experience in the different movements, and also, for example, Adelante in Sofia? Before the record, we mentioned the various movements in Bulgaria, and now you are in Greece. And there you are also involved in various groups. So yeah, could you describe the everyday struggles? What is the aim? What is the mean? How do you do that? And maybe also, what is the differences? What is the political theory behind it, or maybe the ideology? And yeah.
Okay, there are certain similarities and there are stark differences. Talking about two countries, Bulgaria and Greece, that they are located right next to each other, so close geographically, yet quite different in their social and political context. In Bulgaria, one of the most memorable parts of my political activism was the creation of the Adelante Social Center. It was the first self-sustained, self-organized social space. And this emerged from this strand of political radicalism and libertarian militancy that believes that that derives from Élisée Reclus, if you want, that derives from this idea that we have to be open to people, to collaborate with the broadest possible section of society without losing our horizons and our principles. And this was always like the beacon that leads me, that navigates me in my activism, regardless of where I am. For me, I'm not interested into creating a activist clubhouse, as an old text wrote it very well, that we create for ourselves. We close there and we are very happy in a pseudo-elitist way of how advanced we are and how aware we are. I was always motivated by this idea that if we wanted to see a change, we necessarily have to take the great majority of people on our side. And this can happen only by speaking directly with them, getting our hands dirty, and of course, without capitulating our core principles. And these principles being not trying to take power, always strive to work horizontally and democratically, and of course, always self-institute in such a way that you don't leave any space for bureaucracy and authoritarian behavior. So with these three principles, if we look around, we'll find many indigenous movements that are not explicitly anarchist or libertarian to still work on this principle. We find many social movements, labor movements, ecological movements that all revolve around these principles, and there is a lot of common soil that we can work with such movements. And when I came to Greece, it was again, I got in contact with people that had similar mindset. I have been part of a couple of social spaces, because for me it's very important the creation of a space where people can get together, can discuss, can organize events, and to have an educational purpose as well as organizational, because these two are very important. And then, of course, to form a collective, a grassroots collective that will engage in the streets, in protests, display banners, slogans, announcements regarding to topics that are crucial to the dialogue going on in society, and give a different perspective. So the difference, of course, is the scale. In Greece, um, there wasn't a Stalinist regime. So the idea of social change was not polluted to such a matter as it is in Bulgaria. So people still think about revolution, about social change, although this also there is a problem here. More and more people are becoming cynical, but there is still many people who are willing to consider this, and they are not so easily getting afraid of, oh, you want to build gulags and to bring Stalin, etc. So there is a much broader space for maneuvering to action. In Bulgaria, it was very different because if you recall, during the communist time, placards in the factory said power to the workers, revolution, the management to the workers. And now if you go to speak to people about revolution, about self-management, about worker power or people power, about socializing the commons, they are, oh, you refer to that. And it's very difficult to try to de-associate it. And I think this is one of the greatest damages that the authoritarian socialist regimes inflicted on the revolutionary project. They left us a legacy that wherever we are in such countries, we have to always apologize and make non-stop clarification that we do not mean this. So I would say in Greece is much easier, and there are many more such collectives around. So there is a wide space also for collaborations, which is important. And also there creates a wealth of ideas that they are clashing. All this is very important. Of course, in recent years, the Greek government has taken a very firm stand against social movements. Maybe you're aware, you have seen videos with the police brutality becoming a daily reality for protesters, especially for the migrant community. There was very recently a boat that sank with we don't know how many people inside it, that they drowned. So the Greek government has taken a very firm stance. But I think this is one of the basic characteristics from these ex-Soviet satellites and Western satellites like Greece and Bulgaria. In Bulgaria, you don't really see this police violence in the street, but you can feel it that the police is so dominant. While in Greece, you have the feeling that you can do more things in the street, but then the police response is really on full display.
Sure, yeah, I understand. And I saw it myself. And in Austria, even it's there, but it's more soft. It's totally different in Vienna now, of course. But one thing that I observed in my years being around the social movements is that there are most of the times there are 3 to 6 people who are very active, who are engaging a lot, who are almost dictating, okay, what is the agenda, what should we do, what can we do. They are more creative, they are more willing to sacrifice, I don't know, time, money, effort, whatever. And they are also ready to risk also, engaging in a, I don't know, more dangerous or complicated situation. So this is one thing that I wanted to ask you later when we are talking about Castoriadis, when we are talking about liberal democracies and the counterpart, the more radical alternatives, the more direct democracy solutions, so to speak. There I wanted to ask you, and maybe I ask you now because it fits there better. Autonomy and gathering and it's like always a dispute. It's always debating what is the best solution, how we can do this. we had a dispute in Bulgaria in the social center, for example, for weeks it was ongoing about the color of the room of the social center. So direct democracy is tough. What I want to say with simple words is and you described it in the book, autonomy is an ongoing process. And in other words, there is no utopia. There is no, okay, now we have autonomy and now we can still back, now it's good. So so it's a constant fight. It's gathering. It's hard working. Organizing is hard work. And how can we convince people, for example, who are adapted to the system? It's easier to give your vote every 4 years. You sit back and watch, and you have a clear mind, and I did all what I can. So my question is, do we need first of all a cultural change and before we are ready for this direct democracy?
Okay, I understood your question. This is an old issue that is very tricky. I think that the cultural change will take place within democratic procedures and processes. It will not go the other way around. There was this old saying that you don't learn democracy by reading about it, but by doing it. So have in mind that all these socialist dictators did their dictatorship with the goal of educating the people that were not still ready, so that at one point they can become ready. And afterwards, this state mechanism cannot be dismantled, as it has shown. So I think the key thing is that we make this cultural change take place within the direct democratic processes, procedures, and attitudes. Now, the issue is how you develop these processes and how you maintain them. I think this is something that I have taken issue and I have thought a lot about, because I have encountered it in both countries where I have spent my life so far, plus in some international organizations that I have participated. I have seen it in a way to take place in different parts of the world, a very common problem. And that libertarian, autonomous, and anarchist ideas have come to be associated with a sense of anomie, in a sense of hostility towards rules, norms, etc., which I think it's a false. It shouldn't be that. Castoriadis, to take a name that you mentioned and a name that I use a lot in my writings, suggests that self-instituting, that is the body politic, the citizenry, the population as a whole, sets the tone and the shape and the form of the institutions that regulate life. It's a core principle of democracy. He suggests that in order a society to be democratic, in the sense that it enables and maintains a total absolute equality between everyone in the political field and consequentially in every other field, it is by putting set of rules that make certain behaviors very difficult to be exhibited. Like Castoriadis say, you cannot protect people from committing a collective suicide, but I mean, you can do so far. You can try to do your best. Now, whether people will continue not doing it, it's another issue on its own. But I have seen what you said many times, and I think it's one of the most repelling things in such collectives is when there is no clear procedures of how things are going on, and every meeting is like a new day taking place where everyone just gather, discuss about whatever. There is no clear way how decision is being reached. There is this vague notion of consensus. So if no one decides, or if there are too much disagreements, things can drag for days, for weeks. As a result, many people step back, step away from from the public space, and very often they become inactive. Maybe not even announcing their resignation or that they're leaving. They just become inactive because they still are sympathetic to the ideas, to the cause, and to all the project. but they see it as too cumbersome, too heavy, and too time-consuming. We have to think that we live in a times that our time has been extremely absorbed by and bureaucratized by the free market, by the economy, and by different bureaucratic entities that are slowly taking more and more pieces of our time, and we have less and less time on our hands. So when you invite someone to participate in such an initiative, but you cannot provide him with the insurance, a relative insurance. It cannot be an absolute insurance, never, but that we have a certain procedures that will facilitate that decisions are being taken as quickly as possible, as painless as possible, and as clear as possible, so that the exaggerations are avoided and the clashes for no reason are avoided. So I think this is very important. And in my recent years in the collectives that I'm active now in Athens, we have been working a lot about this to try to develop a procedural set of rules that will help us make decisions, follow on time frames that we have, because this is another very big problem. Decisions are being taken, and then or no one is going to implement them, or someone said, okay, I'll do it, but never does it, or does it after a lot of pressure from some other people. So we try to think how we can self-institute such procedures that we can make this workable. If you remember, one of the main arguments of Slavoj Žižek, in my opinion, quite radical, quite ridiculous character, but nonetheless, he has a big audience internationally. He have said that he is opposed to direct democracy because for him it will take all of his precious time, and instead of writing his genius philosophy books, he'll have to be engaged in non-stop assemblies, which of course is a straw man argument. It's quite fallacious, because direct democracy, if you see direct democratic thought from Proudhon to Castoriadis and Bookchin and to the Kurdish movement or to the Zapatistas now, has never said that, okay, we'll have this chaotic assemblies, and whenever decision is reached, otherwise we keep on this debating. There are very strict rules. There are very well-defined procedures. The Zapatistas are functioning for decades in a resilient manner. The people in Rojava have developed an autonomous model with its problems, etc., but it's still working. And we have seen that in a broader scale, of course, decisions are being made about a general plan, and then councils are being established, committees, etc. So this idea that democracy implies that we'll spend the rest of our lives in assemblies, it's completely wrong.
Absolutely, yes. Here in this point, I do not agree with Zizek. Some ideas of him are great, but this one was not so great. Because yeah, this dream of a bureaucratic state that has all in mind and distributes and makes an egalitarian society for us, it's very paternalistic, and it's like the old socialist yeah, what the past, what we had. So it's more the danger is more clearly there to flip in an authoritarian regime. So yeah, in my opinion, you are risking less. It's the same Hobbesian argument, like
I
Thomas.
would like to,
Yeah,
if I can jump, just
of
one
course.
something small. That all these people that think that democracy will be too chaotic, while a type of representative state formation will be more much less prone to chaos, etc. I find it very problematic, because what we see is that the higher someone is in the political hierarchy in a country, less prone he is to popular or legal control. So we see huge level of corruption on the top layers of society, in Brussels, in the parliaments, in Vienna, in Sofia, in Athens. There is the nest of the corruption, exactly because you're so elevated above the rest. So the rules and norms imply for the commoners, and then as higher you go to the to the social, to the political sphere, the less all these rules imply to you. So I always find it very amusing how many people don't see it and would advocate, oh, but the state prevents us from people acting all corrupt, etc. It's the state that promotes, and of course the top layers of the business class. Of course, I mean this is where corruption is, where you're too high in the position of power.
Absolutely, and here I agree with Noam Chomsky, and he analyzed the speeches and the books of many liberal thinkers, and like Walter Lippmann, Edward Bernays, but you can trace it back to Thomas Hobbes and many other liberal key thinkers, which, for example, Hobbes wrote about the Leviathan, and only the Leviathan can save our lives, and there we are safe. So safety and self-preservation is for Hobbes the most important thing, and he was afraid of this war, everybody against everybody, each against everybody. And in my opinion, this is the heart, the how can I say, the the roots of liberal of the liberal state, and the idea of yeah, this is the only reason why the state it's in their opinion legitimate, because he provides us with goods, with safety, with the police force, you know. And yeah, so yeah, it's a wrong argument. And if you see the history, when you trace it back, if you follow the wars and the murder, just count the deaths. And there are many anthropologists and historians. Wolfgang Reinhardt, a German historian who wrote a wonderful book. But there are James C. Scott, Andrei Grubacic. There are many, David Graeber, who died too early, and many others who magnificently showed the history of human, society. And they observed that the more violent society is the state, society that is living under state oppression and under state, national state. Yeah. So
yeah, I agree.
So I believe that on a philosophical level, it's hard to argue against anarchism. But and here's the point: it's not that. And if you ask anybody on the streets, colleagues, friends who are not very political, they will agree to some degree. But the practical level is that what is. And here I also. It's funny because here I agree with Zizek, because he said that that the revolution will not happen today, and tomorrow is utopia, and tomorrow is a different, the struggle will continue, and we talked about this earlier. So it's a constant, as you wrote in your book on Castoriadis. The autonomy is an ongoing process, and yeah, the revolution, because it's like the Hollywood movies, when you see the hero is doing something great, and then you're expecting, wow, and now we are liberated. And this narrative you can see in war times. We need to fight X or Y, and then everything will be fine. And for example, it's a great narrative to mobilize, but afterwards, what is happening? Nothing changed. So building up structures, here I follow the ideas of Gustav Landauer. I like Gustav Landauer and the how can I say, Räterepublik, the Soviet republic. So what is it translated in English? It's some sort of direct democracy. You have it in Germany, in Bayern, and after the First World War. So yeah, and the Zapatistas and in Rojava, they are practicing it to some degree, to some extent.
And they have shown also that it is an ongoing process. I mean, you see a development going on. If you remember in the start in Rojava, they created the cantons. And then there was this call from Öcalan that, okay, cantons is great. A confederation of cantons is great, but it's not enough. We need to establish communes and councils And so they start building this. They start also empowering women. And I was always thinking, I was always fascinated by this dialectical connection that I find between deeper democratization and the empowerment of the whole society. I mean, you see it both in the Zapatistas and in the Kurdish, in the autonomous communities in Rojava, that the deeper the democracy is going, more and more marginalized people are being included. First women, and then other people. I mean, if you follow the visit of the Zapatistas to Europe, there was a transgender person with them traveling. I mean, this was a very powerful sign. We don't know what percentage transgender people are of the Zapatistic community, but the idea and a symbolic level that you send a delegation and you include one such person talks a lot about the level of development. And have in mind the damage that political Islam, political theocracy has done to Middle East. And you have a revolution there of Rojava, where you have women taking up arms, patrolling streets, checking up on men for IDs, etc. Women co-chairing communal meetings, being co-presidents at local councils. I mean, and next to them having theocratic monstrous regimes like the one in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, the ISIS. I mean, all these. It's just next door, and you see with the deepening of democratization, you see these things. We have been hearing that also the situation of the LGBT community, it's improving there. So all this, I have always been fascinated how it works, how it opens the gates to inclusivity. It is very intersectional if you think about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Talking about Rojava, I absolutely agree that there are elements who are really even Western, but not even, but especially Western democracies can learn. But I also see that, for example, and I wrote an article in German on Rojava. For example, the omnipresence of Abdullah Öcalan, for example, is one sign that I cannot, I'm not living there. Who I am to judge them, and I'm just observing, reading books. I never been there, so it's hard to judge them. And also, like you mentioned, you have the theocratic regime in Iran who is butchering their own people, and you have a far right regime now in Israel who is doing criminal stuff. The UN reports today, I believe I saw a UN report talking about settler colonialism. But anyways, and then you have, like you said, Islamic State and many others, and Syria, Bashar al-Assad, and Turkey. So yeah, I understand under these circumstances, it's hard, and because in my opinion, war and taking the gun is not an option. But it's easy for me to say in Austria and with the wealth and with my books behind me. so yeah. But in general, talking about in general, when we go, maybe when we talk then later about the Ukraine, I can see the same division in anarchist movements and schools even. And then I went back and I observed it. For example, Piotr Kropotkin at one point was for war, and he advocated, no, we should take guns and we should go to war. And then there were anarchists like Gustav Landauer who said, no, we need to strike, a general strike. When every in the fabrics, in the industries, in the heavy industries, especially the weapon production industry, they should go on strike. Then we don't have a war. If you don't have a weapon, it's easy, on theory, on paper. So I believe that, this is two schools of thought that in anarchism that I see. And maybe I'm more on the pacifism side, more on the, peace side, but it's easy for me to say.
have in mind that pacifism, as a general principle, was always present in the anarchist movement. I mean, a very, very good example is Leo Tolstoy, who considers the state as the highest form of violence. And so he advocated that people should abstain themselves from participating in any way in the affairs of the state, from giving their taxes to holding a office for the government. So, of course, in this sense, I also agree with this idea that protesting or participating in an uprising against a regime or a state is not the violence itself. The violence was before that through different, it was institutional, the violence that led people to take on the streets. But the element of self-defense that the Kurdish people, for example, advocate, it's exactly aligned with that. Don't forget that the Spanish anarchists in the 30s also took up arms. And at some point, they joined forces with the Stalinists, with the communists. And very similar was the case with Nestor Makhno and the Makhnovist movement. It was an agrarian revolution in the eastern Ukraine that created a classless society, let's say, and a stateless society, where local communes and councils manage day-to-day basics. And Peter Arshinov recalls of his biography of Makhno that the Makhnovist army was very well aware that as an army it could impose itself, and they were always trying to make it clear that we are not interested in managing, in meddling into political or economic affairs. This is up to the peasants themselves. So they also at points aligned themselves with the Bolsheviks and got stabbed in the back, then try to align with the whites, but there as well, it was expected, of course. So it was very uncomfortable movement for both sides. So it was clear that everyone was going to stab them in the back, but they did not have at some point a solution because they were going to be absorbed by either side. And I think the Zapatistas too, if they didn't revolted in 1994, in 1st of January, they too, their land was going to be absorbed by big business after the NAFTA agreement. So they were kind of, it was their last resort, their last stand. And you see sometimes if it's successful, it can sustain itself. In Spain, it could not sustain itself after just for a couple of years. Elsewhere, it was much less. The Spanish communards hold for a very short time, although they gave us the Paris Commune as a notable example. So I perceive this more as a matter of self-defense and not so much as and I was always a bit problematized that many activists, leftists as well as anarchists, often perceive themselves on such matters as forgive me the expression, but as ministers of foreign affairs, always thinking that, oh, this move will upset Putin, oh, this will upset Biden. Our goal is not to think what will upset which leader, but it's to show international solidarity. And when someone say, but yes, but solidarity with being solidarian with people in Kurdistan or in Palestine or in Ukraine is bad for you because there will be sanctions, whatever, and this will hit your pocket. I mean, this is the totally contrary to international solidarity, isn't it? This is kind of a patriotism. I care for me and my own here, for our own pockets, and let these people there be slaughtered. I mean, in this sense, solidarity means that maybe I will lose something here, but I will show my solidarity with the oppressed people wherever they are, regardless of this solidarity being in favor of this dictator, of this oligarch, or this politician.
No, here I totally agree with you. At the same time, I can observe, but there is this like, for example, there are anarchist battalions fighting for Ukraine. I don't heard, and I had an interview with Assembly, an Ukrainian anarchist media outlet in Kharkiv, so near the Russian border. And yeah, he told me that there are many fought against the Russian invasion, and I understand it. But at the same time, being in a battalion hand in hand with people who are wearing swastikas for banderas, for at the first glance, at the first moment, it's contradictory. Also, it's contradictory fighting for a national state. I had an argument. I went to a peace conference in Vienna, and I met a Russian anarchist who she was saying that she's for weapon delivery, and of course anarchists should fight the Russian invasion. And I immediately asked her, but listen, for example, if Hungary attacked Austria, I'm an Austrian citizen. It will never come up in my mind to fight to defend Austria, because I'm not a nationalist. I'm an anarchist. Why should I defend Austria? Who is Austria? What is Austria? What means Austria to me? Austria means my family. My solidarity goes to the people. I'm in solidarity with the people, but not with the state. And everybody now is wearing this Ukraine flag, and they're, so it's confusing for me, because let's be clear. Don't mix up the two things. One is the elite, Zelensky and the pro-Western leaning elite, and then there is this pro-Russian elites, and the victim, the with whom I'm in solidarity with, is the peasants, the people, the subaltern, and I believe that this has to be clear, because Zelensky is not fighting, Putin and his elites are not fighting, and the Russian oligarchs are not fighting. Who is fighting are the peasants, the ordinary people, and they are getting beaten up in Russia, and even now in Ukraine are beaten up to go on the front to fight. So with this war machine, I cannot be in solidarity in any sense. So yeah, I object the war in even despite I see that it's a Russian invasion. I see that yeah, it's difficult. I understand it's difficult.
Yeah, I understand too, and I also have found myself in thinking about this a lot, and being in dialogue with activists from Russia, from Ukraine, and from the broader Eastern European region. And we have to keep in mind a certain thing. Most of these anarchists and leftists who are resisting the war in different ways, because they're not the anarchist battalions alone. There are groups like the Assembly that they're reporting on grassroots resistance in the form of villagers stealing tank equipment of the Russians, or doing mutual aid so that people can stay, etc., and to maintain themselves and not be forced to starve, etc. There is the Solidarity Collective that organizes solidarity with frontline anarchist soldiers as well as to civilians. There are very different groups and forms, but we have to keep in mind that many people in Ukraine perceive this maybe on a subconscious level as a decolonial struggle, which is very different from other type of struggles. And anarchists have supported national liberation struggles in the past. You mentioned yourself Kropotkin, Bakunin as well. Also, many anarchists in the Balkans, like Hristo Bote, for example, who was also sympathetic to national liberation struggles. And also many on the left were always supportive of national liberation struggles for different reasons, all these tendencies. This is very different. Anarchists did not support national liberation struggles for the creation of a nation state, but they thought that a different dynamic might emerge. And I think this is very important today. And I recognize how difficult it is. And I'm kind of pessimistic. I think that Ukrainian anarchists and leftists will not manage it, but it's to sustain or to put in front the decolonial character of this struggle and not the national liberatory one. And there is a big difference, because Russia denies a cultural identity for the Ukrainians, not a national even. They speak for the Russian world. It's kind of, this idea that all these people are somehow Russian in one way or another. And I think this is also one of the reasons that has infuriated so many Ukrainians to take up arms or to somehow resist the war. That's why I have found myself being a critical supporter of this specific, such specific groups. And I have very rarely found, because I have heard a lot of this, so that all they accept Zelensky and they support him. I have seen that many of them are very critical of him. For example, the leftist journal Commons I don't know if you're aware of it, but I strongly suggest you being following it. It's a very good outlet. It does not shy away at showing some of the problems of Ukraine, the strong far right, something which is of course present in almost all of ex-Soviet Union countries and in Eastern Europe. And this is a dialogue that we should have as well to recognize why this revival is there, and also they very well recognize the hard neoliberal policies of Zelensky. I would argue that this is the elephant in the room. Not that Zelensky is a Nazi. This is an easy rebutable argument, and it does not lead us nowhere. He's not a new Hitler. What Zelensky is a new type of a hard neoliberal politician. We have a similar government now in Greece that also thinks in this manner, selling everything, dismantling the constitution, the constitutional protections, etc. Zelensky has been doing that, and there have been, even now in Ukraine under war, there have been strikes, labor strikes, and protests were going on. Even the LGBT community that initially supported Zelensky for his supposedly progressive ideas, also almost immediately after his election protested against him because he backed down on some of his promises towards them. But of course, we have to recognize how contradictory is this. I mean, it is not our first time that we are met with this problem, I think. I mean, the Rojava revolution was before that, in a similar manner, very difficult issue, because they collaborated with the Americans, they got stabbed in the back by them, then they had to collaborate more with them, then they collaborated with Bashar al-Assad, and they are always on the lookout from him, stabbing them in the back as well. So it is very difficult to maneuver in a geopolitical map that is so, to such a degree, dominated by multinational corporations and nation states. You can often, like a text was written in a Kurdish website, that this dance with the devil is very dangerous, that the Kurdish people are doing. And I think people in Ukraine are doing it as well. And we, instead of just telling them, okay, give up to Russian invasion, which I don't think it's helpful, we should try to engage in a critical dialogue with them and tell them that, okay, after the invasion stops, after Russia loses the war, let's say, you have to be on the lookout, because now all this help that you get, these who are helping you, they will take everything from you. They'll take the shirt of your back. So this is a dialogue that also many of these leftists and anarchists are trying to rise it in their battalions or in their neighborhoods. They're trying to raise this awareness, that have in mind that whomever the Western oligarchic elite has helped has taken the triple, and not to say much more, in return.
Absolutely, yeah. This is the crucial point. I totally agree on this. And maybe where I do not agree fully is that this is a decolonial struggle, because in my opinion, it's a fight for hegemony between the two great powers. It's not, coincidence that, for example, not a great power that help, support with so much money and weapons and infrastructure and diplomacy and sanctions. For example, Yemen, or other, or maybe, or Chiapas or Rojava. So you have to keep in mind that there are some interests of geopolitical interests by the big players. So it's dangerous to fall in a trap for either side, being pro-Russia or pro-NATO, because either side is having their own plan. As you mentioned in Rojava, for example, there are, and this is why I'm critical, because what is a decolonial struggle? It's a feminist, it's a peasantry, it's a egalitarian project, and in my opinion, where we can see it, yeah, Rojava has a constitution with more than 6 languages, I believe. It's and like you mentioned, there are ethnicities, there are, and Chiapas, the Zapatista movement. This is decolonial struggle. This is an egalitarian fight for a just and egalitarian society, and I believe that anarchists should follow this path, and when we choose a fight, then we have to go there, and not fight in for a project that is not explicitly, neither implicitly direct democracy, egalitarian, feminist, and I cannot see all these points. I can see just a regime, and you stated neoliberal, and yeah, this is in my opinion not, but you know, again, who am am I to judge them? And if anarchists want to fight, yeah, fight, you know. I'm not telling anybody to go home or to fight, you know. I'm just a thinker, and I want to be clear in my own, you know, concepts and my theories, and you know, I try to understand it, and yeah, so maybe this is here I don't agree with many anarchists who believe that, because on the other hand, do you believe that we can turn the page, we can name another example, you know, change Ukraine with Yemen? Should we fight side by side with Yemenis, with the you know, with the regime in Yemen, and call it a liberation fight and decolonial fight? Or Iraq, you know, should we fight side by side with Saddam Hussein just because an U.S. empire invaded them and destroyed them and make almost a genocide? So it's the same argument is true for Iraq, you know, Afghanistan. Many children died, and we know that this was illegal war in the sense of international law, legal law. So based on the UN Charter. So you know, you have all these examples, and I never heard that, you know, this public outrage was there. I never saw a flag of Afghanistan and Iraq, and I never saw that many are traveling now to Afghanistan and fight for the liberation there. So I'm skeptical, to be quite honest. I'm skeptical, and I'm afraid that, yeah.
Okay, I hear all that. I hear all that. But have in mind that when I say decolonial, I don't mean that Ukrainians take up arms because they want to defend the interests of Biden. I mean, the average Ukrainian, and especially anarchists and
I agree.
leftists there,
I agree.
they feel threatened by Russia on several levels, in my opinion, as how I translate this. And I also, in a way, as a person who was born and raised in Bulgaria, kind of reflect with this idea that you are being viewed wherever you go as some kind of the periphery of Russia, the great Russian project. Being a person from Slavic descent, from such a country, you speak and you write in Cyrillic alphabet. So you always feel this, that you're kind of this. So I think many of these people, that's why so easily the Polish people embrace the Ukrainians. It's very understandable, in my opinion, for people of Eastern Europe. Of course, there is a hypocrisy in the Western world where everyone suddenly applauds Ukraine and forget many other places. Or when the Kurdish people were begging us, use your power to stop Turkey, which is member of NATO, it's your ally, do something. Of course, they were deaf and dumb about this. Of course, I think everyone should be aware. If we think that these elites really care about the people in these countries, or they don't have their own agendas, it will be extremely naive. I'm just trying to think of how the Ukrainian people think and what they want. And I have the feeling that they're not willing to become yet another republic that is part of the Russian Federation. And you see that there are strong tendencies among the Tatars, etc., that they want to autonomize, of course, in this national state mentality. This is a problem. This is a problem everywhere. This is a problem where we live. This is something that we have to, it's an everyday struggle that does not include weapons. It includes books, leaflets, and demonstrations that we have to do. And I think that many of the Ukrainian activists that have joined the resistance in one way or another are doing great in this direction. They try to explain to ordinary Ukrainians that things can be different. And don't forget that Ukraine has this great tradition of the Makhnovist tradition, which is the forefather of modern day anarchism. So often these lost gems, lost historic gems, should be used to try to find a common language with the local people. This is, for example, one of the reasons that I was so interested in Balkan radical history, because I find it is a way to speak to people in different parts of Greece, in Bulgaria, and beyond. I think also Grubacic has tried to do that. to find such examples here and to transmit them to people. So, but as you say, it's I think we are far away from there. We are in the comfort of our homes. We are discussing whatever we say. It's
whatever we
based
say
on
is wrong.
things that we have read and report, of course. So
no, I
this is the
totally agree with you. And I had a wonderful interview with Maria from Russia, who is now living in Scotland, and she works for the movement of conscientious objector in Russia. So and she described also the problems of the Russian state, framing and labeling their organization as, you know, foreign agent and dangerous to the nation state and so on. And she, I was talking to her about her experience and impressions of the Peace Summit in Vienna. And she had a bad feeling because she said, but you are always talking about NATO and Western imperialism and so on. But I come from Russia, so I have to speak about my own, you know, Russian imperialism. And you know, I'm fighting on a daily basis, explaining to Russian citizens and my colleagues and friends and many others that Putin is an aggressor oligarch, and we should get rid of this authoritarian regime. And she's right, and I completely understand her. And in this interview, I totally get her, and of course I agree. So maybe the solution is everybody should fight. You know, I'm in Austria, so I have to fight that the Austrian government do not join NATO, and maybe my fight is different, you know, and because, you know, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, our fights are different, but our solidarity should be common. I mean, when people in Ukraine are calling us, let's not go far. For example, like collectives like Solidarity Collectives, a libertarian structure, a network of groups, ask us for money to buy protective gear for frontline anarchists, or for medicine to distribute in neighborhoods. I mean, this is a different thing from calling, okay, arm NATO and send whatever. It's a different issue, in my opinion. That's why I'm always interested also to listen to the voices from those in below, to anarchists and autonomists and radicals in Russia, in Ukraine, and also I have been recently problematized with all this talk about multipolarity and all this as opposed to single polarity that we have now, that the world is not dominated by one superpower, but there are local like feudal powers that they do whatever they like, in a sense. What I would advocate for is like a non-polar world where there are no local superpowers, where Turkey will not be allowed to be a local superpower and dictate what's going on in its neighbors, where Russia cannot do that, where the US cannot do that. I mean, I think that many people on the left, and unfortunately even anarchists, embracing this talk shows the short-sightedness of where we have get. We seem that we have often lose the horizon. And of course, if you just blindly say, oh, the Ukrainian side is great, the long live Zelensky, it's again short-sightedness, of course. That's why I say I engage in critical support. I recognize very well what the problems are, and I recognize that there is a Azov regime, etc. But this could make me a great impression, like it makes to many people in Greece, for example, who does not know the broader context. On the Russian side, there are several such regiments. Just Putin was wise enough to not have them directly under his command, and they're instead private military contractors. And Serbia has paramilitary groups that are extremely, exclusively far-right. And I'm afraid that if in Bulgaria there was a need, they were going to spring up several such groups. They're already in the eastern Bulgarian region. I think you could be aware. I don't know if you have read. There are some groups like that they're quite problematic.
I met I don't want to name their names, but I met them. I met some Stalinist. Yeah, I believe they are Stalinist. in Bulgaria, I believe 2 years ago, and we had a long discussion. And on capitalism, we're on the same page. On on patriarchy, we're on the same. So we had a great debate. But in regard to the Ukrainian conflict, they said to me that my neutrality, that I don't say that Russia is on the right side, and I don't say that NATO is on the right side. I think that the ordinary people are the victims. That I am already being part of the Western narrative and Western propaganda, and if I'm not with Russia on this war, I'm on the wrong side. Because, and they said it like this: if the weaker, and they framed Russia as the weaker part in this fight against NATO. And they said, if you are not with solidarity with the weaker, you are on the wrong side. Something like that goes the argument. So, and I was laughing. I mean, this is an absurd debate. I mean, and of course, I don't fall into this trap, and I see that there are some traps, and people are falling into them because, of course, the U.S. has a long history of violence, and the U.S. empire did show that this is not a reliable source of democracy, and so I understand how can people fall into this trap. On the same side, people like Maria, the Russians you did interview, they saw the other side of the history. So they saw Russian imperialism in Chechnya, in Dagestan, in Bergkarabakh, so in Georgia, in Western Africa now. The Wagner group is in Africa very active. So yeah, so yeah, here in this sense, I'm not neutral in the sense that I don't care. I'm neutral that I see, okay, this is the fight between two big powers is not my fight. So, but I understand on a personal level, I understand what you meant with solidarity, and here I totally agree with you. We should be in solidarity with ordinary people, and so I advocate to do more on this military objections. We should pick Russian soldiers from the border and take them home, and as well as Ukrainian soldiers. I mean, and
the European Union was very bad in this. It made the life of Russian exiles a living hell.
Absolutely,
I know
a scandal.
people who are forced to leave Russia, and they find it really difficult to move around Europe, to get acquainted. And this is a problem that we should not punish, let's say, the more progressive part of Russian society for not being able to organize a revolution or whatever. And this is very sad that currently the European Union is punishing them instead of helping them. But as I said before, the Western oligarchic elites are not known for not being very hypocritical in this. But again, you mentioned this about the Western narrative, the Western, it's again, this tendency that tends to take away agency from people. I mean, there is not a Western narrative in general. There is the narrative that is enforced on us by the economic and political elites. And there are many narratives in parallel, they emerge from below. So when people like Putin or Modi in India or Erdogan, who they claim that they're fighting in a way Western imperialism and Western fascism, and by this they mean LGBT rights or whatever. There's such people also in Bulgaria, for example, who when they speak about these things, they mean the LGBT ideology and propaganda. They tend to forget that also the LGBT rights and the visibility of this community was hard won by communities in struggle, by social movements that that they started a riot, they were picketing, they were. If we see today a happy image of a pride parades, it does not mean that a couple of decades ago these were not much more violent events, and these parades today commemorate this. So with all this, I want to say that the rights that we have here are hard won. They were not always here. There were revolutions happening, as well as in the Middle East and elsewhere. There were periods where they had certain rights, and periods where darkness was unleashed upon them. And of course, the US, for example, has its role in helping political Islam spread in the Middle East and submerge some very progressive revolutions like the Iranian Revolution. It was a very progressive revolution with the council system being developed. And I would advise anyone watching us today to check out the works of CLR James. CLR James is a great Trinidadian thinker who always in his work, he was fascinated, of course, about the fights of Pan-African people worldwide and in the Caribbean especially, because this is where he came from, but also in people in Eastern Europe. For example, he was very excited with the Hungarian uprising of 1956 and the creation of councils and assemblies by the workers themselves. He was very enthusiastic, and what he was advocating is that the Pan-African movement gets in touch with the Hungarian workers and that we recognize, this is what he was saying, that we, the Caribbean people, African people around the world, together with Eastern European people, we recognize that we're both victims of colonial rule, on the one side by the US and England, etc., on the other by the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, etc. So these people should recognize. And this is very difficult. You know, this is very difficult to get people on the two sides to get disenchanted with the other side and to really recognize that they are more close with the oppressed on the other side than with the ruling class. And this is especially strong in Eastern Europe. Many people have this idea still about some kind of better life in the US, and this often stands as an obstacle to solidarize with people there. So they'll maybe with more easy hand overlook Black Lives Matter revolts in the US instead of recognizing that these are our brothers there and sisters who are fighting.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. No, I totally agree with you. Yes. The Spanish philosopher, I visited a lecture, a book presentation of him, Raúl Sánchez Cedillo, or Cedillo, and he, from a leftist perspective, described the fallacies that we can fall into and the traps that we can fall into in war times. And because every war machine has its own mechanisms of mobilizing, its own propaganda, its own narratives, and so it's easy to fall into simple traps. And even left wing can fall into traps. Like I mentioned, the Stalinists. I mean, they are simply falling into this trap, and also many others. So yeah, one have to be. So I like your stance, and I like your position that you said I'm critical, you know, in support. So this is very crucial because you're not, you know, you're seeing all the negatives, despite that you're seeing it as the smallest evil, or how can I describe it? Like, it's a necessity in this situation. So I understand your position, and this is it makes sense, absolutely. Talking about agency, I'm not sure I heard on a gathering from peace scholars, I heard the argument that we are happy that Ukrainians want to fight, and then I raised my hand and asked, but who is this agency? Who is this subject? The Ukrainians. Who is this? Who is this guy? Who is this group? Who are they? They are not homogeneous, and this is what I said in the beginning. We should differentiate, and critical peace scholars differentiate between the state and the people and the society. So we need to differentiate. Of course, the state wants to fight, of course, and even if you read the Russian newspaper and the Russian propaganda, they want to fight, but not the ordinary people. So you need to beat them up to go, to do it, the military service. So in my opinion, talking about agency, it's also critical to see, both want to fight. No, most of the people do not want to risk their lives. I mean, it's common sense, and who is so brave, to go there and to risk their lives for what? And here maybe we can jump into the concept of imaginary from Castoriadis, because for me, I'm okay, let's not make it personal, but for ordinary people, you know, they are not brave. So why should they? How can you convince him to fight for something? You know, in your book, or was it a lecture that I heard from you? I don't remember, but it was like the idea was like the IS, the Islamic State, managed to mobilize even people from Western Europe, you know, where there are wealthy societies and everything is okay, but lack of what? Lack of a vision, lack of, you know, and this is the idea maybe, and maybe we can now jump to Castoriadis and the concept of the why is it important, you know, to have this, you know, big picture, or this idea or this feeling that, okay, we need to change something.
Yeah, Castoriadis resorted to this, or let's say this, the figure of the imaginary appeared in the very frequently in the thought of Castoriadis, because, you know, Castoriadis began as a Marxist, and he gradually moved away from Marxism and towards autonomy, becoming in a way part of the libertarian tradition, let's say, without he himself declaring being a libertarian or whatever, but it was very obvious from his idea that he rejected the state, rejected capitalism, religion, etc. But you know, often in Marxist thinking, there is very strong presence of the economics. That's why Castoriadis, also being a bit influenced by Caro Pulani, he speaks about economism. And he says that this is a problem not only of Marxists, but this is an inheritance that Marxists took from capitalism and from the capitalist way of thinking. Everything is about the economy. We are economic players first and foremost. Because of that, he at some point realized that this is not only not enough, it is less and less capable of sustaining our societies. And that this is what I was referring to. We were hearing back then when the Islamic State was rising. We were hearing from that the kids, young men from Arab descent, was leaving. They were like second or third generation. They were not even that religious or whatever, but they were leaving the safety, the relative safety. I mean, they could still get shot by police in the streets of Western big cities, but nonetheless, they leave this, and many of them moved to the territories controlled by the Islamic State to join the fight. And this is something that Castoriadis has been warning us about since the 90s and the 80s, that there is a great crisis of significations that is in a way provoked also by the current capitalist mode of production. And unfortunately, that many who are anti-capitalist still operate within this, trying to think that how we'll be able to consume more fairly, for example, while capitalists say just consume more. And Castoriadis was saying that it's not all about consumption. This was a very similar threat we can find in the works of Caro Pulani and the Great Transformation, where he sees this, that there was this tendency of the tyranny of the economy, that the market, the economic exchange takes the upper hand and control and determines everything else. And Castoriadis started thinking, but okay, is this all? And this concept of the imaginary appears, where one's thinking dwells. That you don't start as a blank sheet. We're not, as many neoliberals would like us to think, we are free thinkers and everything for you, you're independent, etc. Although he also does not fall in the trap that other psychoanalysts fell, or thinkers, that this imaginary is a dead-end street, that you have been determined to think that way. This is the imaginary, and this is it. He says that despite this, there is also the radical imagination, the possibility that a new radical element is inserted into our thinking, and we make a radical rupture with the dominant imaginary, and new modes of life can appear. You could have the Spanish Civil War in 36, and suddenly a large section of the country be run on anarchist principles. You can have Rojava, etc., etc. So it's not a determinist in this sense. It's quite open-ended. And I think that this is something that we have to face in Europe, in North America, but also all other countries that are joining this type of life. What once upon a time was called American life. This exclusively materialist type of living, because it impoverishes us. We have to recognize that it needs to be something more. Always people in theocratic societies, the religion is everything. And Castoriadis often gave this example that in such societies, something that can seem to us irrational, to an European or to an American, that you give all your belongings to do a trip of to Mecca, for example, or to another holy place. But for you, this in this context that we have now, it's crazy. But if you live in a different context, theocratic one, this would seem like the correct thing to do. It will seem crazy that to keep your money and not to do it. And also in this context that we are, one thinks that for me, engaging in political participation is much less productive and important for me than working 2 shifts, making money, etc. Because political participation has been overshadowed by the economic sphere. So in Castoriadis, for example, gives this example with the ancient Athens, when the democracy emerged. He recognized, of course, that there were shortcomings. Like all of us, you cannot close your eyes and to say it was a perfect society. Of course, there was patriarchy, there was slavery, sexism. But, for example, it's hard to imagine that the average citizen of Athens walked miles and miles to reach to the assembly, to take part, to spend time, to lose day from his work. Some people have called it proletarian democracy, like Eleanor Meskin would, because people were compensated for leaving work. They were financially compensated. But I mean, to us, today it can seem very weird, let's say. But to the imaginary of the ancient Greek citizen, it was the normal thing to do. You know, the term idiot today comes from ancient Greece. It was the person who does not attend the public meetings, who does not participate in public lives, who is close to himself. This was considered very weird and problematic, while today we have the exact opposite. You accuse women who are very active, for example, often for hysteria, being hysteric, while they may just be very active and caring about public affairs. You mock other people for concerning for the public affairs. There is very good movie, a Russian one. I don't know if you're aware of it, Durak, which means something like the dummy. And it's about one guy who works, if I'm not mistaken, in a state service that inspects buildings and the state of them. And he recognized that one building was wrongly determined as being safe. And he discovered a huge crack. And then he tries to change the solution about this building, the status of the building. And all the bureaucrats against him. And when one day he heard that there will be an earthquake, or I don't remember what, or his calculation was saying, I don't remember, a long time ago, but he considered that this is the moment where the building will fail. And he go there and start hitting on all the doors saying, please go out, the building is not safe, it's failing. And when everyone go down and saw that the building did not fail, they lynched him. And this is the paradox. He was not doing it for himself. He actually destroyed his career because he was dropped out of his position, etc. He got lynched by the people he tried to protect, but he did it for the public good. And this is, like we can say, this radical imaginary. Although he was part of this imaginary, this was the place where he would grow up, where he was all his life. He still had this rupture in his thinking, and he tried to do something else, something selfless for the common good. And so this can give us, in a sense, hope that things can be different. There are such people, even in the places where we live. Maybe we know them, maybe we don't. Maybe we have heard about them. And this is the hopeful thing. I don't think that the Kurds in Rojava were always active politically. We have heard that there was very problematic aspects in Kurdish society, even today. But we see that things can change. And I think this is very important for Castoriadis, and this is something that has given me hope And to give the positive thing, there were not only conservatives going to support the ISIS or Putin or whatever. There were also many people who spent time with the communities of Chiapas, in Rojava, or helping Ukrainian women on the border with Poland, etc., or even going inside Ukraine, helping voluntary groups of anarchists, etc. So there are also people that find meaning in this, and they also risk their life. Going to a zone in the Middle East that is such a hotbed of trouble, to experience the revolution, to support it, etc., it's still, again, searching for this different meaning. This meaning does not necessarily have to be religious. It does not have to be national. It can be political. And this is what I advocate, what Castoriadis as well advocate, that we should find the meaning in political participation and the radical equality.
Yeah, that sounds very nice. And I observed for example, in the COVID pandemic, that the meaning and the signifier, the consumption, capitalist consumption. So it was not possible. It was not there anymore. So people cannot go out in the street and consume, watch a film, a Hollywood movie, or go, yeah, I don't know, go to the mall, go to the shopping mall and buy some clothes or whatever. So, and I saw many people on the streets in Europe and in Bulgaria, or especially here in Austria, and the far right won many voters, and also in Germany we can observe this. And colleagues of mine who from school, wrote at me, contact me, and all the time they and suddenly they were politically interested. They are interested in politics. They are interested in what's going on in the world. So I mean, COVID did change something in the mind of the people, because they lost their hope. They saw that consumption, as a religious or as a meaning, as a, I don't know, signifier, can change rapidly. So there was a positive thing in this whole chapter, if we want to be cynical.
Yeah, and also if you see the conservative part who rejected completely any measures being taken, they consider it a hoax or whatever. Often these were people who were very obsessed with their right to coffee or the people in this type of gatherings. It was this thing that why should someone oblige me wear mask, etc., etc. It was this very atomistic way of thinking that is typical for capitalist economism. And on the other hand, of course, there were some people that, due to conservatism, they were afraid for their health and for their own self. But also there were many people that you hear them expressing progressive views that, okay, I'm being careful, not only for myself, but to protect other people as well. And this was hopeful. You see that you were not alone. There were many people that were considerable about their fellow human beings. And it's very indicative that when the Zapatistas came to Europe and they landed, they wear all protective masks. They were also very considerable, and we know that specifically the Zapatistas, they are very gentle and very considerable people. They very much care for one another and for the rest of the people, for nature. So we saw that I think this division was very clearly exhibited. Of the people that still uphold the old significations of capitalism, of economism. That's why we saw some tendencies of the left also joining, exactly because, as Castoriadis said, some of them still bear these economistic elements of capitalism to some extent. And then you had others that maybe they were anarchists, liberals, leftists that still had some common points.
Absolutely, yes. And jumping to the next topic and your next book, in the book Common Future, you quote Giorgio Agamben, and it was a very funny quote because Agamben said the insistence on work and production is a malign one. So this is a great quote.
Yes, I
and
love it.
and this is also, and here you touch a very interesting paradigm that I also observed, and I wrote on it. And last month an article appeared linking degrowth with peace studies, and my thesis, it's not a radical one, but degrowth can lead to more peace, peaceful society. It's basically like this. And here you open up this paradigm that, okay, through this lens that, okay, what is our status quo? Work, consume, work, go sleep, and consume more. So this is our mechanism that we are in. And in this paradigm of economic growth that you are describing in this book, and that you are criticizing, once you grasp that, you can imagine how to stop it. It's simple, you know? Just stop economic growth. Just think of alternative economics. And yeah, I was very inspired by that book. And
but have in mind that I insist that unlike other thinkers like Serge Latouche, I don't put it the carriage before the horse. I think that all this should be led democratically. The degrowth is not a program that should be implemented by a good government or whatever, because there is the risk of such an implementation turn into how to say, into a green fascism, let's say. And I'm very careful about this tendency. You know, for example, all this talk about depopulation led the Indira Gandhi's government in India in the 70s to do enforced circumcision to millions of men, mostly from the lowest classes of society, so that to stop the overpopulation. And all this was with an environmental mindset, according to her. All this was a project to, and it was a very problematic, very monstrous, if you want to say, in my opinion. So degrowth is very important, and I think it should be a part of a direct democratic mindset. And why I say that? Because I think that there is a direct link between ecology and direct democracy. They both put the human decision making in relation to the human's immediate social environment and then his wider environmental one. Let's say the labor movement brought in its inception the question of what we should produce, how we should produce it, and put the question of the people involved in production taking part of the decisions. Later on with the environmental movement, there was another question: what we produce and for what reason, and what is the impact? So again, it puts crucial questions to all of us, that we produce all this, but why do we produce? Do we need it all? It put a radical question before capitalism, that capitalism cannot respond. Capitalism says that I need it so that I can continue function and I can continue flooding your supermarkets with shiny garbage. He does not have a better explanation for that, and we haven't been given a better explanation. Or the ridiculous idea that growth will lead to technical innovation, etc. There is a wonderful book by David Graeber, The Utopia of Rules, where he speaks very much against the bureaucracy. And there was this element that if this was true, we should think of how our predecessors viewed the 2000s, a society that was flying around space, whatever. And what happens is that we have been delving deeper and deeper into touch screens and such technologies. We have abandoned many other innovations because they do not bring a short-term profit. And that's why the growth doctrine is not really bringing innovations. It's focused on short-term profit. This actually hinders technological progress, and not much else. So in this sense, it should be up to the people to recognize these shortcomings, to recognize that this growth doctrine is also killing the only planet that we have, and that it is not worth it. It is not worth it to have to choose between 5 croissants and 20 beers to destroy the planet.
Absolutely.
In my opinion, at least.
Absolutely, yes. And
this was very good thinking by Thomas Paine in the Rights of Man. And at one point he speaks about the rights of a generation over the legacy that they'll leave on the next one, and not the wealth that they'll leave on the next generation. And we should stay thinking that this planet does not belong to us.
absolutely,
and that's
yes.
why Castoriadis always called that we should act as stewards, because we cannot grasp fully of the functioning of the universe. Maybe we'll never be able to do it, but we can realize that we can do as less damage as possible, so that the other species, living species, can continue existing, and the next generations will have a place to live and not be brought into a hellhole.
Absolutely. This so you preemptively answered my question, because I wanted to ask you this concept of self-limitation, and why did Castoriadis emphasize this concept of self-limitation in direct democracies? And now you answered it fully, because yeah, yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. And
of course, there is something more about self-limitation, because Castoriadis thinks that in no society we can be totally free. There will always be the need to put limits to ourselves. Just he distinguishes between two forms of limitation. He says that in the heteronomous society, where the laws, the heteronomos, hetero means from the outside and nomos means laws, so the laws come from elsewhere. He says the limitations, the laws, the rules, the norms, all these derive from external power, be it the state elite, the bureaucracy, the multinational corporations, or in a theocracy, the representatives of God. In the autonomous society, where the law comes from ourselves, from the auto, nomos, comes from ourselves, means that these limitations will still be there, but they'll be placed by ourselves. So they'll be kind of self-limitations, in the sense that if a community decides within a federation to violate a common charter that we have all drafted within our federation, that the women are equal to men, and suddenly there is a offshoot, a small community inside say, okay, we do not want to follow, we should have the mechanisms to block that. We are already trying to do it, even in our collectives, when we decide to collectively that, okay, we want this to be a safe zone for all kinds of people, and all kinds of people are welcome. This automatically will mean also that we exclude certain people. So when Castoriadis speaks of self-limitation, he says that by blocking certain attitudes and ways of doing things, you open paths to others. And he says that this is not something strange or new. This is how societies, human societies, have been functioning from the dawn of days until today. And from the most radical to the most conservative societies, there were always certain things that are off the table and certain things that are there and are encouraged. So in this sense, nuclear energy, we can say that we don't want it in an autonomous society. It's too dangerous. It also presupposes like a military style of governance regarding it. It does not promote democratic decentralization, but the opposite. So you see, when you say that, okay, I want decentralized type of governance, you start also saying that, okay, so this is off the table because it does not work. This as well. This is, in a nutshell, a self-limitation.
absolutely, yeah. And let's jump to the last question, because now we mentioned and social ecology and the link between, economy, state, societies, and also now we linked it to ecology and the futures, and the next generations. So in your anthology that you published on Murray Bookchin, you also this book is also describing all that what we said, the link between economy, capitalist societies, and many forms of oppression, and the thinker who describes all of them in one term, so to speak, is Murray Bookchin with the term social ecology. before we go to this concept and what he was thinking about it, I was a little bit laughing because when I read it in the beginning, you mentioned that Bakunin, that Bookchin was criticizing postmodernist thinkers like Nietzsche, Derrida, Foucault, Lyotard, Deleuze, and to be quite honest, I love them. So I was thinking, who is this guy? And then it comes worse. But he also criticized anarcho-syndicalism, where I come from, and Marxism. So, okay, Marxism, it's okay. I criticize it myself. But anarcho-syndicalism, be careful. Now you have to be careful. And so he's criticizing all what I believe. So, and and then I had to laugh again because he rejected the anarchist label. So he was
Yes.
yeah. Please help me understand this guy because.
Okay. Look, Bookchin was quite a character. With the years and studying his work, I find it very, very useful. He's very practical, and his visionary texts are on very practical level. It helps you envision a society, and that's why they were also very helpful to Abdullah Öcalan to develop the concept of democratic confederalism. He was very problematized, let's say, with all these thinkers that could be attributed to the postmodern tendency, because they, in a sense, watered down all values, all principles, in a sense. This is how he saw it. And he was very problematized by that, because he said that if we say that everything is abstract, nothing is real, everything can be described in countless ways, power is everywhere and it's unavoidable, he says that the logical conclusion for the normal person is that, okay, so nothing can be done. I should instead sit in my home, meditate, and see the world from a totally different lens and say, oh, this is not a prison, it's a very wonderful free garden where I can do whatever I like. So this was very much problematizing. Was a big problem.
I can choose between I can choose between warm beans and cold served beans.
Yes. So this was a great deal of his criticism to the postmodernists. He was very problematized with that, and then, of course, he came from Marxism himself. He had all this problem with the fetishization of work, of the worker, etc. And this is also where he came in clashing with anarcho-syndicalism as well, because he considered they continued this element of fetishizing the factory, the place of work, and leaving many things out. Because have in mind that Bookchin was one of the first anarchist thinkers who start putting very much the issue of, let's, in a sense, intersectional. He started putting it in this way without labeling it this, because he was saying, in the place where you live, you are a worker, but you're also a housewife or a husband. You're also a neighbor with some people. You also live in a city, and this city has specific characteristics that are maybe oppressive or liberating, etc. You also live in a natural environment which has specific effect on you. So all these things he say bears different oppressions and different and has different causes that all can be traced to the same element, and which is domination. So he advocated that you cannot see domination in different ways. You cannot change your glasses, and domination means that certain section of society dominates the rest, and that humans dominate over nature. He traces this back to the dawn of man and of mankind, of humankind, when gerontocracy appeared, where the elders appear, and they said, okay, we are the old ones, we hold the knowledge. When men said, okay, we own the women. So he traces that. He places great importance on feminism, because he considers it one of the earliest forms of domination, and the gerontocracy, which he brings it in a different package today. it's not anymore the oldest which are the wisest, but it's the technocrats, those who owns the knowledge, who claims to know all the knowledge. So he considers that narrowing our revolutionary project to the place of work, as many Marxists and anarcho-syndicalists do, narrows the scope of the struggle that we have to leverage. And that ultimately, to get us to a freer society, we have to take into consideration all these other pieces. Otherwise, as class reductionists, we run the risk of establishing a society that will be authoritarian, etc., etc. So that's why Bookchin places at the heart of his project the demos, the municipality, because he said within the municipality where you live, you are a political being, that the future of this municipality depends on you, your work, your environment, your social relations, and it's up to you to organize on this municipal level and to open pocket of liberation. And then such other pockets emerge in different municipalities, and you promote the idea that they will confederate in a federation. And in this federation, all these assemblies, these municipal, autonomous municipalities will craft the charter, constitution, etc., will take decisions collectively, and will. So this is also what the birthplace of democratic confederalism of Öcalan. It's based on to a big degree on this idea of Bookchin. And proceeding on this, he had some controversial opinions as well. For example, one of these that he say the parliament and the national level has nothing to do with the libertarian tradition. So we leave this out. We are 100% opposed to parliaments and to nation states. On the other hand, he say the municipality was always part either of the Paris Commune, either of the Guangzhou Rebellion or whatever. There are many other urban rebellions that were wonderful and very important. And the council, the city council was always a revolutionary tool, from the Boule, the Vouli of ancient Athens to councils during different revolutions. It was always the body that coordinates decision taken by all the citizenry. So he advocated that maybe sometimes radicals should run for municipal, to become members of municipal councils. I have different opinion on him of how workable this is today, because the municipal level today and municipal councils have been turned into like in miniature states, let's say, and often they are so much disempowered that there is very little that impact you can have through them on everyday life, because they are watered down their power to implementators of the decisions taken by central political level by the parliament, and they are often just administrators of EU fundings, let's say. In Greece, in the Balkans in general, this is what local governance is doing most. So he had also this idea about the city, which, if you leave the electoral party, is very productive, because they are very important movements, urban ones, and also like Bookchin insists in the tradition of Lefebvre, in the city you become citizen because you're not related through a blood tie. You're not part of a close communities like our villages, which he recognized that are important. But he said the city is where a citizen culture of a public affair, interest in public affairs emerges. And so his ideas gradually lead him, and of course this is something that has to do with context, of refusing the label of anarchism, because while he was alive and active in the 70s, 80s, 90s, anarchism in the US and elsewhere as well was becoming increasingly lifestyle oriented. There was a lot about squatting, music, subculture, and they often rejected all this that Bookchin was standing for. What also I spoke in the start, that the assembly should not be institutionalized with processes, and all this should be more liquid. We should discuss in general and not have specific process, etc. So Bookchin was very, very annoyed by that. Also, there was a certain strand in the green anarchist movement that was more interested in mysticism, adopting strands of Buddhism, Krishnaism, while Bookchin saw in a desecularized manner the environment, and he thought, like I said before, that it's about political decision and political consciousness of us seeing ourselves not as consumers and exploiters of nature, but as stewards of it. So he came in clash with almost all tendencies of the anarchist movement. And so at some point he say, anarchism has become too individualist for my taste, and I would prefer to use another term. So he adopted the term communalist, because he says that the community and the commune are the hallmark of the revolutionary tradition in general, recreating political communities, social communities around the institution of the commune, etc. So he begins advocating for all these things, the libertarian municipalism of his, where the city has a very central place, and then all this he attributes this to the communalist tradition. So it's not that he abandons anarchism or the basic core principles of anarchism. He enriches them and he continues. And it was never, as you probably saw in the introduction to the book, it was never for me myself big problem that he rejected the term anarchism, because the content is of what matters. Many of the people that we refer to today, or the struggles that we refer to, are not explicitly anarchist, and this is a good thing, because I think certain principles are more widespread than we are ready to recognize. And this is very, very good thing. It helps us to go out of our ideological clubhouses and to reach out to other struggles, to other thinkers, and enrich our own thinking.
Okay, now you made the picture clear for me, and yeah, I get the points. I mean, he's totally right. Patriarchy and colonialism were long before capitalism, for example. So here, Marxism, in his orthodox view, is yeah, to narrow it on economic yeah, perspectives. And also I understand it with in my interview with Benjamin Franks, he also stated that there is a lifestyle anarchism, and I believe he coined it class struggle anarchism. So here I can draw a parallel between Benjamin Franks, also funny. Yeah, so, and I get the point. I see it in my everyday bubble. So many around are wearing black, the big R, and they are not protesting.
Which is not necessarily bad.
No,
we
it's
should
not. Yeah,
point fingers and say don't do that, but be conscious that this is not the struggle. What is about?
absolutely, yes, absolutely.
Because when you focus so much on this, you try to keep it that way. This image, this lifestyle inside the group. Well, for me, and I'm very happy that in my current collective, Aftenergi, it's called, it's Libertarian Social Ecology group here in Athens. There are people from different age groups, and this, I think, is very important. I think this is a key element to achieve social change. You have to have a wide array of social groups to want the change, not to go behind you, but to want change and to be willing to work. And you have to reach out to the elderly, to young, to middle-aged. In few words, political participation should not be equated with having a party and having a fun with your friends. This is what I want to say, maybe
Absolutely.
in a more simple way.
Absolutely.
There is time to have a punk party and have a beer and enjoy it, and then it's totally other to have a public assembly.
Absolutely, yes. When we were discussing books, nobody came. The same 5 people, basically. And Sunday, when you join our punk parties, it was always full. It was a funny time. The Solidarian movement was great there. We begin with the name Social Center, and then I believe we changed it in Solidarian Center. But yeah, anyways, yeah, it was a great time. I love you all guys there. Pesho, Petar, Evgeny, I love you guys. Yeah, I see that time is running. Wow.
Yes.
And I see that I don't have any further question. I mean, maybe the last point I was confusing stuff, and then I talked to Evgeny, and he told me no, that Alexander Nakov is not your father, and because I confused it, and I confused it, I believe that one of these great, and there are this Konstantinov, I believe his name was, also a big anarchist. Georgy Konstantinov.
Konstantinov, he's very famous, yes.
Georgy.
It's a big personality of the anarchist tradition in Bulgaria, yes.
Sure. So I was confusing things, and then I asked him, and yeah, so and that's why I wanted to ask you about Alexander Nakov. So yeah,
I had the pleasure of knowing him personally, and
really, yeah,
to have collaborated with him.
Really,
in the
yes.
collective. He was a great person, very calm, always having a way with the young people. And I think he was, in a way, a role model for many people. He could be, because he was always kind-hearted, although very firm in his ideas, and at very old age he was very politically active, and he has a razor-sharp mind.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, 1 year after he died, I became to know his, ideas and who he was. And when I was in Sofia, a girl told me about him, and then please, I want to please give me the contact, give me his number. I want to visit him. And unfortunately, she said that he passed away. So yeah.
This is his autobiography.
Okay, nice.
It's available online. The dossier of subject number 1218.
Nice.
A Bulgarian anarchist story by Alexander Nakov.
Nice. Okay, I should buy
I
this.
can send it to you, and we can post it under the video.
Sure. And if you come to Vienna, of course.
Online,
Or
so
just you are in few weeks in Vienna, so you can.
I can bring copy.
That will be nice. Yes. Yeah. So and his story. I mean, there is even in the Bulgarian television, state-sponsored television, I believe there is a short documentary on him, because he was in prison, so in under 3 different regimes. It's unimaginable, under fascist Bulgaria, then under communist Bulgaria. Yeah, and what a figure. And
yeah,
I believe
these people were unwanted by either regime. They were in the fascist camps, in the fascist prisons, and then in the gulags of the people's power when it came.
Yeah, but then even under liberal Bulgaria also.
Liberal capitalism, liberal regimes, because Castoriadis is very careful with this. He calls them liberal oligarchies, because oligarchy is still when you have government that is away from the people. And I recently wrote a text about this, that democracy is one, and up until the 19th century, that there was a clear separation. From ancient Athens, Aristotle says that democracy is where there are public assemblies and sortition, and the oligarchies where there are elections. And then you have Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who is also very clearly distinguishing, without being, he thinks that democracy is utopian thing. He does not speak about direct democracy. He calls it simply democracy, means the rule of the people. Thomas Paine as well makes very clear distinction. He said the raw democracy is unmediated rule of the masses by the masses. And it comes, I think, the first time that we can detect is Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, where he travels to the United States to document how they work. Actually, I think that he had a different name for the book, but the publisher in France said, no, label it Democracy in America. And it was actually a book where he begins a confusion that lasts to today. We call everything where there are elections, we call it democracy, which is the opposite exactly. And so Castoriadis always was saying liberal oligarchy and not democracy. And so
which is very unfortunate as well, because this is co-opting our fight, for true democracy, for radical democracy, even in the sense of Laclau and Mouffe, if you want to term it like this, for example, because there are many variants and variations of democracy, and so yeah, it's unfortunate, and this happens.
And this I want to say that this also makes democracy into an empty shell. If you can have a democratic monarchy, or representative democracy, or a stateless direct democracy, all of these are democracy, and they are so different from each other. There is nothing in common between some of them. How come that they're democracy? Then democracy does mean nothing, absolutely nothing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It turns into a joke.
Absolutely, and this is what Nancy Fraser observed with the term progressive neoliberalism, because this new form of neoliberalism, co-opted these progressive terms and lifestyles and this pink washing, and all. Yeah, this is also a big fight, a democratic fight for sexual liberation and many others, and so on. So it's unfortunate, and it gives right-wing populists and many other actors the argument, but you are this guy, so I don't talk to you, or and it brings more confusion, because even in my everyday experience, when I talk to ordinary people, not right-wings, queer, what is this 20 or 30 or more genders, and what it confuses stuff, and so the same happens with democracy, and yeah, it's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate.
And I wanted to say this in relation that these people were imprisoned by the fascist regime and by the communist totalitarian regimes. But the big strength, I think, of capitalist liberal oligarchies is that, of course, they will be very harsh if they need to, if they feel threatened by a movement, like we have seen in France, for example, the Yellow Vest, or now, where so many people were crippled or killed even. But they will first try to co-opt any movement, any struggle. Oh, you're an anarchist. Here, buy a T-shirt of anarchism. Why don't turn your activism into a startup process? And they are very successful in this. They turn everything about. They successfully manage still to turn everything about profit and income. They make many social centers to operate on the basis of thinking how to pay the rent, or how to pay this or that. It's everything about money, and this is their very big strength.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Here in Austria, we have a small struggle. My comrades from the anarcho-syndicalist movement are fighting against other anarchists who run a cafe, restaurant, and they are hiring people from Hungary and many others, and they're not paying them, and you see the exploitation, and you call yourself an anarchist. I mean, yeah. But yeah.
I would say I'm not against cooperatives. I think that they're important in the way that they get the boss dynamic within a workplace. But yeah, it's very difficult to fight in an environment that is not so openly totalitarian and authoritarian, and that has this friendly face. That okay, you're an outraged community, an LGBT community that fights for your rights. Okay, we'll decorate the street with the pride flags and go shopping. They turn it into business. Everything is being turned into business, and this is also part of the degrowth element.
Absolutely, yes. You can now the European Union is sponsoring and have this framework. Circular economy and degrowth is now getting into this concept, and even from the Economic Forum, World Economic Forum, the German guy who wrote 2 books. In one of his books, I forgot his name.
Sure.
I believe this was his name.
Also about social economy and stuff like that.
And one chapter he's dealing one chapter with degrowth, and I was in, wow. I thought this is our struggle, and now big capitalists are also talking about degrowth. It's funny. And
yeah, of course, they try to take out the teeth of every project, to take out the element of diffusing power, which is what they're afraid of, and try to turn it around and make it all about profit. There was a very good meme from last year, big fires that were all over, and there was like people in a board meeting of a big corporation or something, surrounded by glass, and outside everything was in flames. And one of them was saying, oh, we have to think some way to turn this all about money. And I was thinking that this is exactly the mindset. We're seeing everything burning around, and there are people there thinking, okay, we have to turn profit from this. It's exactly
absolutely funny, yeah. Yeah,
okay.
dear Yavor, I have to thank you very much for this long talk, and yeah, I enjoyed reading your books, and yeah, in the YouTube info box we will share the links where people can find the books. Most of them, I believe, are open source, so you can download it. And yeah, I thank you very much for having the time, and for discussing, also for sharing, and also for debating. I love debates. I love to criticize people, to be criticized. I love sharing experiences, and yeah, it was a great honor, and yeah, it was a
Thank you
pleasure.
very much. It was pleasure. I must say it was pleasure. Looking forward for further collaboration.
Thank you.